Thank you for joining us for this online training. My name's Esme Smith and I'm one of the advisory teachers with the EDIT team. So this training is called Below the Iceberg. And what do we mean by below the iceberg? It's unpicking dysregulated behaviour and those big feelings that our little learners can feel, and why they happen and how we can help our learners when that does happen. First of all, I would just like you to have a think about what behaviours do you see in your environment. It could be something like kicking, punching, spitting, biting, and behaviour, it can mean different things to different people. I myself find spitting unbearable, I hate it, but for other people they may not be bothered by that at all. So it's worth keeping in mind what we all mean and what we all think when we're thinking about challenging behaviour or dysregulated behaviour. Those of you who have done this training in person with me will have seen me do this Pepsi Max experiment. So we have a bottle of Pepsi Max there, which represents a young pupil in our school called Max. And we're going to think about all the things that can go wrong for Max before he starts school. And we shake it up every time. So it might be that he woke up late, or he had to take a different journey into school. It was raining and his shoes felt soggy. And every time something goes wrong for Max, we give it a shake. And then here he is arriving at the school door, fizzy and ready to pop. And thinking about what we can do to make that transition into school easier for Max. So we open the bottle up very slowly. So that represents, it might be a meet and greet, it might be some sensory time, it might be a job that Max comes in to do every morning. And it's just thinking about, wouldn't it be lovely if all of our children arrive at school or arrive at preschool and they're perfectly regulated? But a lot of the time that doesn't happen. Our children walk through the door and they're already feeling a bit fizzy, and it's our job to help them with those feelings. And I always like to share this visual. Luckily, I don't come across this attitude very often anymore, but children are not just naughty and doing it on purpose. They don't choose to behave dysregulated. And actually, what behaviour is really telling us are lots of different things. It's some needs that those children have. It might be anxiety, it might be needing connection, it might be that they're tired or something's wrong, it might be they're too sensory overwhelmed. So we're going to have a think throughout this training of some of the different reasons why we see dysregulated behaviour. Children are not just naughty and they do not choose to behave in a dysregulated way. Similarly, I like to use that metaphor of the iceberg. So what we see is the behaviour, which is the tip of the iceberg, but this training is called below the iceberg. So what is everything that's underpinning and underneath the behaviour? What's really going on for these children? Dysregulated or distressed behaviour is always telling us something. There is always a reason for behaviour. That child is always communicating something to us. Sometimes they don't always know what it is they're communicating, but the behaviour is trying to tell us something. It's a symptom of something. So it's always worth remembering that. What is this child trying to tell us? And I've put in this quote here about attention seeking. When we say attention seeking, that has such a negative context to it. But what does that really mean? Attention seeking. Yes, that child is seeking your attention. They want you, they want a relationship with you. So they're attention needing or they're relationship seeking. So when we think about attention seeking behaviour, we don't need to think about it in a negative way. That child is trying to tell us that they want you, they want a relationship with you. And so thinking about those children who perhaps you're thinking display some unwanted behaviours because they're trying to get your attention, thinking about that in the opposite way then, how do your children in your environment know how to get your attention in a positive way? So how can they ask for your attention in a way that's positive rather than negative? So just think about that. Think about being proactive and preempt behaviour. So those children that you know need that extra adult time, how are you building that in? Are you building in potentially special time or meet and greets with certain adults? So think about preempting the behaviour and teaching children to ask for attention in a positive way. And I've shared that saying there, children who need to be loved ask for it in the most unloving ways. So those children who need more of our time and more of our attention, often the reasons behind that are quite sad. They need to feel loved and they need that more than others perhaps. Thinking about the different functions of behaviour, first of all, I've shared there Maslow's hierarchy of need. So, those of you who've done teacher training will have seen this before lots of times. So, thinking about all the things children need before they are ready to learn. So, children have to be fed, they have to have had water, they have to have slept well. A lot of our children come into school and they have not slept well. All of these things can then affect their behaviour. Safety needs, needing to feel safe and secure in their environment. Lots of our learners, especially if they have autism, potentially don't feel safe and secure. So, thinking about all of these needs that need to be met before children are ready to learn. And then other functions of behaviour. It might be escapism. So it might be that children are trying to avoid something. They could be trying to avoid work, maybe because they don't like it, or they're worried about getting it wrong, they feel anxious about it, or they're bored. So escape and avoidance can be a reason. Social attention, so we've spoken about that. Children who are seeking your attention or they're seeking a relationship with you. Basic needs. Are they feeling poorly? Are they in pain? Are they hungry but they don't know how to express those feelings or recognize that in themselves? Sensory needs we're going to talk about, but sensory needs play a massive part in dysregulated behavior. And then tangible. So, in a way, has a child mislearned that if they behave in a certain way, they gain access to what they want? So, for example, if they show some dysregulated behaviour, have they learned that they then get to go home? Or if I behave in a certain way, then I get out of doing some work. So, in a way, the child mislearns that if they display some challenging behaviour, then they get what they want. I'm not going to spend a long time talking about the theory and the science behind autism, but I just think it's worth remembering the differences in an autistic brain. And I say differences because there are many strengths and many positives about the autistic brain, but in terms of this training, and when we talk about what we can do to help, we tend to focus on the challenges and the things that can be difficult. But it's just worth remembering those three areas of development. So, social understanding and communication, flexibility, information processing and understanding, and sensory processing and integration. So there are lots of challenges that children can face if they have an autism profile in those areas, which perhaps if their needs are not being met can lead to some dysregulated behaviour. We're going to talk about some of them, but we're not going to go into great depth about autism theory, but it's worth having in the back of your mind. We're going to think a little bit now about sensory processing and the effects that sensory needs can have on dysregulated behaviour. Katrina Lowry, if you haven't come across her, is an amazing speaker. So she is on social media and her page is called Neuroteachers, and she talks a lot about adapting your teaching to meet the needs of neurodiverse children. She shared the statistic that 5 minutes of sensory input reduces disruptive behaviour by 65%. That is massive. And so when we think about meeting children's sensory needs, quite often we think about children doing their work or their learning task and then having sensory input. If we can do it the other way round, it's far more effective. So if a child can do their sensory program or have some kind of sensory diet for 5 minutes and then they sit down to do their task, they are far more likely to be in a place where they are ready to learn and they're receptive to learning. Quite often it feels like it's counterintuitive, but if you do it that way round, it's going to have so much more of a positive effect. So just thinking here a little bit more about what we mean by sensory processing and integration. So there are the five commonly known senses that we all know, and there are two lesser known senses. So there's proprioception, which is telling your body where it is in space and how to move smoothly. So those children who have proprioceptive differences are often the children that bump into everything around the classroom. They perhaps can't plan their movements brilliantly. Vestibular is another sense which is all about your sort of inner ear and your sense of balance. And those children who have vestibular differences are often the children who spin, who flap because they're trying to meet that need. They're the children that can be just sat on their chair and fall off for no reason because their sense of balance is different. And then I haven't put it on here, but there's also interoception as well, which is again thinking about all those inner feelings. So recognizing when you feel too hot or recognizing when you feel hungry. Again, some of our children have differences in those areas and they don't necessarily understand those feelings, which when you think about all of those things can lead to feeling quite worried or anxious, wondering what's going on inside of you. So sensory processing and integration really can have a massive effect on behaviour. Just a little bit of information about the sensory process and how we process that sensory information around us in our environment. So for a neurotypical person, first of all, you register the sensory information. So that might be the telephone ringing, for example. So you hear the telephone ringing, you register that. Then your brain modulates that information. You hear the telephone ringing, and then your brain says to you, oh, the telephone is ringing. It modulates what happens. And then the next step is that you then integrate that. So your brain hears the telephone ringing, it tells you, oh, the phone is ringing, and then you integrate that by then answering the phone. For some neurodiverse people, that sensory process doesn't happen as smoothly as that. It might be that they don't register the noise at all. It might be that they know the phone is ringing, but then their brain doesn't tell them what that information is. Or it might be that they know the phone is ringing, but then they don't integrate that by going and answering the phone. So for some people, they have to think about every single step. And it can cause confusion or anxiety or fear because if every time, for example, the fire alarm goes off, you don't quite understand what's happening, that can make you feel quite worried or quite anxious, and then you might see some dysregulated behaviour. So it's worth thinking about that sensory process for our learnings and for our learners and for some of our children. Perhaps is that process not happening as smoothly as it does for others. And then just thinking about how people are hypersensitive or hyposensitive to sensory input. If you are hypersensitive, these children are often the avoiders, so they are very overwhelmed by sensory stimulation. So their sensory cup is already full, and then we add something to it and it spills over. So these children quite often are in fight or flight response because they feel too overwhelmed by their environment. Then you have children who are hyposensitive. So their sensory cup is empty and it takes lots to fill it up. They are the sensory seekers and the sensory cravers. So they're constantly trying to alert themselves. So they might be rocking, they might be running around, climbing on desks and tables. They are the sensory seekers. So again, just think about that. If you have children that's ringing a bell for, you can have children who are a lovely mix of both. So they might be very hypersensitive to noise, but they might be hyposensitive to proprioceptive information. So again, it takes a lot of trial and error to work out what works best for your learners. So if you've listened to that and you're thinking, yep, that sounds familiar, I think I might have a pupil who is displaying some dysregulated behaviour because they have sensory needs, what can you do to get started? So a great place to start is to think about an environmental checklist. These are available through the NHS and they're a great way at thinking about your environment and what can you do to support children with sensory needs. Again, if you're thinking at a more individual level, you might want to try a pupil sensory checklist. Again, they're available through the NHS. You can do ones as a school team, but also you can send them home to parents and they can do them at home as well. But that's an interesting way to unpick for an individual their own sensory needs. Then there's something called the landscape of fear. That's such an awful name, and you don't call it that to the pupil. But landscape of fear is, for example, you would give a child a tablet and you ask them to take photos of certain areas around the environment that they don't like. That's quite interesting because sometimes it can be areas that we haven't considered. It might be that there's a certain place in the school that they don't like the smell of, or there's a certain area where they don't like the feel of the carpet. So that's quite useful again to unpick perhaps sensory information that we hadn't considered, but the pupil is then able to show us. The next few slides show some visuals of different activities and exercises you can do for children with sensory needs for different sensory areas, for example vestibular or proprioceptive. This slide in particular uses the words alerting, organising, calming, which you might recognise from the book Sensory Circuits by Jane Horwood. But the next few slides are worth taking some time to perhaps pause and have a look and see if there are some different ideas there that you want to give a try. So just a couple of books that I really would recommend looking at. Sensory Circuits is a classic book about how to put in place sensory circuits to support children to be ready to learn. Quite often we think, oh, okay, a child has sensory needs, and we give them lots of stuff to do, but where's the real understanding behind it? So again, it's worth thinking about the process of calming and organising children as well. So you can do the alerting stuff to get out all that excess energy, but then we need to do the calming and the organising to bring back children into a place to be ready to learn. Another great book is The Kid's Guide to Staying Awesome and in Control by Lauren Bruckner. That's got some great ideas in there about regulation, and it's got some cards that you can photocopy and examples of exercises of things that you can do quite easily within the classroom without needing lots of resources. So that's another great one to check out. Okay, so I'm going to spend some time talking through what we call the arousal cycle. So this is the process that children go through when they're feeling dysregulated or they're feeling distressed. So we start off, well, wouldn't it be lovely if we start off at that baseline where everyone comes into school perfectly regulated, but the chances are some of our children coming to school already slightly up the trigger phase or the escalation phase. So this is those children who are feeling slightly fizzy, slightly annoyed, frustrated, maybe getting towards angry. And this is where you'd be putting in as many strategies as you can to try and distract or to support them in that phase. But sometimes it doesn't always work, and we do hit what's called crisis phase. Crisis phase can look different for different children. For some children, it might be trashing a classroom. For some children, it might be lying on the floor, what's looking like a toddler tantrum, so kicking, flailing, screaming. It might be hurting others or hurting themselves. So we have to support children through that crisis phase. We're going to talk about that a bit later. But I would go with whatever program your school is using. It might be something like Team Teacher, it might be Price, but it's individual to different schools. And then we have what's called the recovery phase, and you'll see on this diagram the recovery phase takes a long time. So often it takes children, after they've been through that sort of crisis phase, it takes them a long time to calm down. And I'm an experienced teacher, but I have made the mistake many times of thinking a child is calm and ready to learn, and I've gone to introduce a work task or asked a demand of them, and it's caused an additional assault. And sometimes those secondary crisis phases can be worse than the first time round. So it's worth remembering that that recovery phase often takes longer than we think. And then there's this post-crisis depression phase. And that's where children will feel quite low and quite depressed. Nobody wants to hit crisis point. Nobody wants to feel that way. So you will have a period of time where that child feels really bad about themselves. I used to teach a little girl who in that phase she would say, I'm a bad girl, I'm a bad girl. So you have to put in a lot of support at that time. It might be that some children need to sleep, but often they think that they've ruined that relationship with you. So at that point, it's really important that you reassure them that you still like them, they are a nice person, you still care about them. So often doing some restorative work after a situation has happened is really important. With the next few slides, we're going to have some case studies of different children in different situations, and I want you to have a look at them and I want you to have a think, what's gone wrong? What is that child communicating? Remember, behaviour is always communicating a message. So, what's gone wrong and how can we help? It's our job as the responsible adults to help children when things go wrong. So, spend a few minutes having a look through those case studies and thinking about what could you do in that situation to help that child and to maybe help it from not happening again. I hope you're able to pause there and have some thoughts. And just remember, it's not always the obvious answer, it might be numerous things going on, but it's our role as the adults to unpick what has gone wrong and how can we help the children through those different situations. The bulk of the rest of this training now is going to be thinking about inclusive strategies. What can we do to support children? We've thought about why dysregulated behaviour can happen and what our children are feeling, but now thinking about, okay, so how can we help them when this happens? So some of the things we're going to talk about, differentiating the curriculum, so adaptive teaching and how we can differentiate what we're expecting these children to be able to learn. We're going to talk about workstations and building some independence. Calm spaces. Now, calm spaces, I prefer this term rather than timeout because sometimes there's a negative connotation to timeout, but calm spaces. Do your children know where to go when they're starting to feel fizzy? So it's not a punishment. Where can they go to be calm? And also, what do they do when we get there? Sometimes we send children off to a pop up tent or a nice dark area and just expect them to be calm, but maybe having something they can do to help them be calm. Is it going to be some mindful colouring, listening to some music? So it's worth thinking about teaching our children how to be calm. And I've put on there as well about times for relaxation. So if you think about a child's day at school, we put so many demands on them and we're keeping them busy all the time, but making sure there's time for relaxation is really important. It's an important life skill as these children get older to know how to relax. Building routines, we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about using visual structure to help with that. Everybody likes having a routine and knowing what's coming up. Of course, you cannot stick to a routine all the time, but my suggestion would be that you try and have a routine as much as you can. Reward systems, we're going to have a talk about this, about rewards or maybe motivators or enticing. How can we motivate children to engage with their learning? Reducing adult language. It sounds really simple, but it's really effective. If you are feeling stressed and dysregulated, if you're trying, someone's talking at you lots, it just sounds like noise. So reducing your adult language and increasing the visuals is really effective. Clear start and stop for activities. We're going to talk about this as well. So making sure children know what the expectation is, how long they're doing something for, and then knowing when they've finished and what they can do next. We have lots of training on our Edit YouTube channel about visuals, so I'm not going to spend a long time talking through everything individually, but I always like to share this image. So visuals are so important, and I hope that you're all using them consistently all the time in your environments. So visuals are permanent. So for our children who find it difficult to process language, having a visual means they can process it in their own time and it's permanent. It hasn't just gone in one ear and out the other. Visuals prepare children for transitions, and we often see a lot of dysregulated behaviour about transition. So having a visual to support with that's really important. They help children see what you mean. They help build independence, and again, we're going to talk about the importance of independence for children's self-esteem and their confidence. Being able to do something yourself is really important. Visuals are transferable, so I often hear that children will do something for one member of staff but they won't do it for another. So actually having a visual and the child following what a visual says can be transferable between people and environments. Visuals have no attitude and they reduce anxiety. So we sometimes see a lot of distressed behaviour because children are feeling anxious or they're feeling worried. So a visual helps with that understanding and it helps reduce anxiety. And visuals help all children. Every child likes a visual. You're not going to do anyone a disservice by using visuals in your classroom. What I will say about when we implement visuals is at first children might seem like they don't like them, but that's because a visual is telling them what to do and they don't like that feeling. So when you introduce a visual, persevere with it. It sometimes takes some time. I would say a good 2, 3, 4 weeks. Keep trying, keep persevering, and with time, all children like a routine and they like a boundary, so they like the safety of a visual. Here are some examples of visual timetables. So visual timetables are great to have in your environment. You have to be referring to them. If they're in the corner of a room and nobody's looking at it, it's not helping anyone. So making it part of your practice to be going to your visual timetable, taking something off when it's finished and looking at what's next. It really supports children when they're feeling dysregulated to know what's coming up and to know what's expected and what's happening. And I always say the best practice is you take something off when they finished, because if you have a child who really doesn't like a session, even if they finished it, if they have to keep looking at the symbol, that sometimes is enough to make them feel dysregulated. Now and next boards can work really well for children who perhaps find the visual timetable too overwhelming. There's too much on there. So you might want to use an individual now and next for certain children. They're also a great way to motivate children. So if they're having to do something that they don't particularly like, I'm going to use maths as an example here, it might be that you dangle the carrot of something motivating or enticing as the next. They're also great for using around your environment to support children with transitions. So if you're trying to get a child back to the classroom from the playground, using a now and next so that they know what they're going back to, and if that thing they're going back to is something really enticing, that can work really well to support children at those times as well. Remember, when a child is feeling dysregulated and distressed, they can't comprehend what you're saying to them. It's just noise. So if you have a visual, that's far more effective. But also trying to learn something new when you're feeling dysregulated doesn't always work well either. So that's why we have to be using them all the time. So you're not just whipping it out when that child's dysregulated. It's something they already know and they already understand. Timers are a way of using a visual. They're a visual way of representing time, and they can be really useful for those children who become upset when they're having to share a resource. So for example, at the school I used to teach at, we had lots of bikes, but there was one red bike, and of course everyone wanted the red bike. So at playtime we would use a timer to help children know when it was their turn and the next child's turn. It helps those children feel more secure in knowing that the resource they've given up, whether it's a bike, they know they're going to get it back. So they feel more secure, so they're less likely to feel dysregulated. I always say here, little health warning, sometimes timers can cause anxiety for some children, so they don't work for everyone. But if they do work, you're onto a winner and you can use them for lots of different situations. They're also great if you're doing something that that child doesn't particularly like. They can see that there's an end in sight. They know when it's going to finish. So I would recommend using timers if you can. They don't have to be these sand timers. They can be electronic ones. So whatever works best for your situation. So just some final thoughts and top tips about visuals. Children have to be taught how to use them, so it takes a lot of adult support at first to be modelling how you use a visual. Children don't just pick it up by osmosis, and so you have to be using them consistently all the time as part of your practice. That way you're not just pulling out a visual when that child's dysregulated and expecting them to learn a new skill. There's something you're using consistently all the time. Quite often I hear when a child moves up perhaps to the next class, oh, they don't need their visual anymore, and then it all goes wrong. It might seem that they don't need their visual, but actually everything's going well because you do have the visual there, and the children like the consistency of it being used. Make them age appropriate and differentiate them to suit individual children. So if you have children that can't read words, don't have your visual timetable in words, have it with symbols or with photos so it's accessible for the children. Make hundreds of spares. They always go missing, particularly the sessions that the children perhaps don't like as much tend to get posted down the back of radiators or hidden, so make sure you have hundreds of spares. And then visuals should move with you around the different environments in school, whether it's the sensory room or the playground, so make sure you take them with you. Children need the visual to help them transition back to the classroom. It's really important that we give children the language of emotions and teaching emotions. It's quite a complicated process. First of all, you need to be able to recognise how you're feeling and know what that feeling means and then give words to that. So it might be understanding that that fizzy feeling in your tummy might be because you're nervous or excited or you're hungry. So it's quite a tricky process to be able to teach different feelings. Zones of regulation is a really good way to do this. So there are 4 different colours for different types of feelings. So yellow are sort of your fizzy feelings. It might be anxious, worried, excited, fizzy. Green are when you feel happy, ready to learn, and you feel fine. Blue is those feelings if you're sad or you feel poorly or sleepy. And then red are things like angry, out of control, cross. And so the idea is that children are able to explain how they're feeling by checking in with the different colours. So it might be that they feel yellow because they're excited for PE, or they feel blue because they didn't sleep very well last night. And then with each of those areas, you'll see in the photo there should then be a corresponding toolkit. So, okay, I feel sad. Look at the toolkit. What can I then do to help me when I'm feeling that way? Before I talk about rewards or motivators or ways to entice children, I'll just say here it's really important to have a discussion with your entire setting, whether that's a school or a preschool, and think about what your policy is as a school, because I know some schools don't believe in rewards. So thinking about what works best at your setting. But rewards are a great way for motivating children, where there's sometimes that element of they're willing to do something they don't particularly like because there's going to be something in it for them. Some key principles when we're thinking about positive reinforcement. So, first of all, it sounds obvious, but a reward needs to be rewarding. So, really think about that individual child and what is rewarding for them. It might not be something that we might find rewarding, but for them it is. And then there are different types of rewards. So you can have some that are linked to a desired behaviour. So it might be that you're working on kind hands and kind feet. And for now, you're not worried so much about language. So your reward would be linked to kind hands and kind feet. Or you might have a reward that's linked to perhaps doing something the first time you're asked, or remembering to put your hand up, or waiting your turn. So you can have rewards that are linked. You can also have rewards that are more general catching good rewards, which cover every time that child is making a good choice or doing something positive. Best practice really is that the reward needs to be given as soon as possible after they've achieved and they've been successful and got that reward. That just helps children understand that the reward is linked to the desired behaviour. Sometimes I see children on a Monday or Tuesday earning minutes of golden time on a Friday, and that can seem like a very far time away and it can seem quite abstract. And also, if you've messed up on Wednesday, why bother trying for the rest of the week? So, if you can give the reward as soon as possible, that really works well. And rewards need to be achievable. So, if you do have a reward system for a child and they're never getting that reward, it's not going to be effective because it's not achievable for them. So thinking about what is that child going to be successful at doing. Reward needs to be manageable, so don't promise things that you then can't deliver. So don't promise time out on the playground and then actually it's pouring with rain, or another class are doing PE out there and you can't have it. Or don't always promise going to see the head teacher, because then if the head teacher isn't there that day, then it just becomes confusing and it means less. Being consistent, so remembering reward systems and remember that you're using them all the time. And then personally, I would never move a pupil down. So if you have something like a peg system, just keep focusing on the positive and moving children up rather than moving them back down, because again, it can become confusing. And if possible, let the pupil choose the reward first. So you're dangling that carrot. They've chosen what they want and they know it's coming. These are just a couple of examples of some really simple reward visuals here. So once you earn your three pieces of the photo for the computer, you get some computer time. Once you've earned your 3 stickle bricks, you get the stickle bricks. Really easy and clear for the children to understand. And this is a more general catching good reward system. So you might have something like a ladder and you've got a picture of the child or their name and they're moving to the top of the ladder. And when they get to the top, then they have their reward. So this is a more general getting a reward system for when that child's making lots of right choices. So actually, if they're a child that's really struggling to stay on track, you might go for something more like this, and they can reach the top quicker and help them feel successful. So this next section, we're just going to spend a little bit of time thinking about curriculum. So does this sound familiar to you? Do you have those children who, when it's provision time, flit from one activity to another? So they don't really access anything properly and they just flit from thing to thing to thing? Or do they get stuck doing the same thing over and over and over? So quite often that's construction. So they're the child that's in the construction corner all the time, never moving on to anything else. So we need to think about how are we supporting them to access their learning then, because disengaged children can be disruptive children. So think about how we can enhance that provision, how we can scaffold the provision so that the children are able to access it more readily. So think about your adults. Adults modelling how to play with things are a great way of enhancing the provision. Are you using visuals, things like play scripts and play sequences to help teach those play skills so the children are able to access the provision time? And then I just wanted to add there as well, making sure there's time and opportunities for children to do something they really like. If you have a child who perhaps loves lining things up or likes tipping things out, likes spinning, it's okay for that child to have time to do that. We all like to have time to do things that we enjoy and that we find relaxing. So that's fine too, to build that time in as well. Think about what's important for the children to learn. So if you have a child who really does have quite complex needs and perhaps cognitively is at quite a lower level, don't be afraid to meet the children where they are. So to go to their level and think about what's important. If you're not sure where to start, perhaps if it's a child with an EHCP, have a look at what their targets are on there. And I'm going to talk about next some alternative ways to assess children and to think about next steps. There are some really great assessment tools out there that you can use to show alternative progress that the children have made. So there are engagement scales. So there's the Leuven scale. So if you have a child who perhaps at the beginning of the year could only sit for 30 seconds, but you've been putting in some interventions and working on engagement, and by the end of the year they can sit for 20 minutes, that's massive, meaningful progress for that child. So using a Leuven scale or an engagement scale is a really good way of tracking that progress. Dingley's Promise have made an assessment tool. It's a DFE assessment tool, and it's a great way of showing smaller steps of progress within the early years curriculum and then highlighting what next steps might be. Cherry Garden, they're actually a school and they've developed their own early years curriculum, and all of their curriculum maps are on their school website, and they're good ones as well. There are bought-in curriculums such as equals curriculums, which I know some of the special schools use. They are the curriculum adapted for children with additional needs. You do have to pay for those, but they might be something that you're interested in looking at. And then when we work collaboratively and we work together, we come up with the best ideas. So don't be afraid to reach out and contact your local special schools and see if you can share good practice. The next few slides are going to talk through what social stories are. So social stories are developed by Carol Gray, and they are a great way for teaching social skills, which a neurotypical person might find quite obvious, but somebody with additional needs may not. So it's explaining things like how you share, why you have to share, why it's important we use kind hands or kind words. They're a really great way to teach some of those skills for children who might struggle to socially interact with other children. I am not going to spend a long time during this training going through all the details about social stories, because we have other training on the Edit YouTube channel about social stories, which if you wanted a more in-depth training about, you can access that. Comic strip conversations have also been developed by Carol Gray. And again, there's additional training about comic strip conversations if you would like to access that. But they work well with children who are quite cognitively able, because it takes quite a lot of explaining and verbal ability needed. But they work really well as a restorative practice. So if something has gone wrong, there's been a falling out or an incident, they are a great way of unpicking with a child what went wrong and what could we do next time if that situation happened again. So they're a great way to reflect and to learn on something socially that's gone wrong. This next section of the training is all about mindfulness and relaxation. And it's an important skill to be able to teach our children to relax. So a lot of our children, perhaps with autism or with additional needs, feel anxious and out of control a lot of the time. So being able to know some strategies that help them to feel calm are going to be really vital and important moving forwards in their life, and also helping them to deal with conflict as well. So again, there's separate training on the Edit YouTube channel about this, but it's an important skill to think about embedding across your entire setting, not just for your children with additional needs, but how are you teaching children to relax and be mindful and feel calm. It's a great go-to strategy for those children who sometimes are dysregulated. If you can teach them one or two breathing techniques or some mindful movements, something they know will relax them and help them to feel calm again. Okay, we have been through an awful lot in this training, but I just wanted to sum up with some of the things we've spoken about proactive strategies that you can be doing all of the time to help avoid escalation. And then, of course, things go wrong. So, thinking about the reactive strategies, what can we do afterwards when something has gone wrong? So, proactively, things that you can be doing all of the time as part of your daily practice. Making sure that children's sensory needs are being met and their basic needs are being met. Are they in a position where they are ready to learn? Have you got a clear structure? So you're using your visuals, you're now and next if you need them, using them consistently all of the time so that children learn about routines and expectations. And then thinking about having your resources ready. Are you helping make sure those transitions are smooth? So your resources, they're ready and they're suitable for what you're about to teach. You've differentiated and you've adapted your teaching to meet individual children. Pace of learning, slow down, meet the children where they are and go at their pace. Language, it's the right quality and quantity. We're not going to overload children with too much language. Being consistent, children feel confident and safe when they know that they've got a consistent partner with them. Realistic expectations, so again, thinking about those rewards and motivators. Are children successful and are they able to achieve? You've got your visuals always out and available, social stories and comic strip conversations if you need to use them. Remember to be positive, there is always something positive to build on. And praise must be meaningful and specific. So we can be doing that all of the time and sometimes things still go wrong. So what can we do when a child's hit that crisis point? So offer sensory input. So again, meet sensory needs then when they need it. Think about the calm stance. So your communication, assessment, awareness, listen, make them safe. Personal space. Make sure you're not boxing in any children. Give them space. One of the most effective things you can do is to talk less and to give them space. Give children time to process, and it might be again that you're using a visual to help with that. Knowledge of a child's behaviour plan. So if it's a specific child that you know something in particular always triggers them, make sure you know that about that child. Change of environment and change of face are really effective. It doesn't show weakness if you have to swap in with another member of staff. Sometimes it's a really effective tool. Distraction. Most of what we do is distraction. If you can see a child is starting to feel fizzy or you want to move them onto something else, distract them with something they like. Think about your tone and your volume. Children will match where you are, so if you can remain calm, that's really important. Time out, and not time out as a punishment or anything negative, but give that child some time to be calm and have some time away from a busy environment. Restricted choices, so you're giving the child a choice, but it's not too free rein that they can't make it. So restrictive choice, help give them a way out. And increase visual support. Reduce your language and use your visual instead. And this is just a nice visual to show if you give all of your attention to negative behaviour, that is what you're going to see more of. But if you can give your attention to positive behaviour, there are always positives to build on. That is what you will see flourish. And just remember that every child is unique and they're an individual, so you might need to try different things with different children. Don't be afraid to try new things and don't give up straight away. Try them for a few weeks before you have a good gauge of whether it's working or not. And be consistent and communicate well. Good luck. I hope you have found this training useful and wish you all the best. I'm always available if you want to contact me over the phone or via email through the Learning Support team. Thank you very much.